This video is packed with information. I did my best to keep it as simple and as digestible as I could, but you're likely going to need to rewatch a few segments and potentially the whole video a couple times to make sure you get all of this completely. Reminder, hit me up if you have any questions. Write them down, send them over to me, because I want to make sure you get every single bit of what's in this video so you understand the throw, because our training will be all based around what we talk about here. All right, the pitching motion is a series of stretch shortening cycles where the output of one is the input to the next. That's super important, so I'm going to say it again. The pitching motion is a series of stretch shortening cycles where the output of one is the input to the next. So energy loads into a piece. It performs a stretch shortening cycle and then unloads from that piece. And as the energy unloads from that piece, it then loads into another one, which performs a stretch shortening cycle, and then it unloads from that one. Now the energy loads and unloads, loads and unloads all the way from the legs to the hips, to the trunk, to the arm, and finally out through the ball. So specifically, what does that look like within the pitching motion? The first input is loading into that back leg. When you actually drop down into that back leg, I refer to that as the downward move. So once you're loaded into that back leg, what's the output of that? It's going to be pelvis rotation, and you're going to be moving your center of gravity faster towards the plate. So what do we got now? Your pelvis is rotating and you are moving fast towards the plate. The next step is your front foot's going to get into the ground, and that's going to actually accelerate your pelvis, have it rotate faster. So how does that work? So I want you to think about this from an overhead view, okay? This is your lead leg and this is your pelvis. This entire system is traveling up, which would be towards the plate. Now, as this system is moving this way, something essentially stops this whole system from moving, and that's your front leg getting into the ground. And when that system stops moving, all that energy that you had built, how fast you were moving towards the plate, then pushes back on the pelvis. This would continue forward, but when something stops this lead leg, it then pushes back on the pelvis and actually rotates it closed. And that's a really important point. That's how you transfer this momentum that you've built towards the plate into rotation. Is you've got that lead leg, you've got that pelvis, you essentially hit, it's called the block, your front foot gets into the ground, you block that energy into pelvis rotation. So let's recap what we got so far. You load into that back leg, that's the first input. The output of that is pelvis rotation and moving faster towards the plate. The next step is then your lead leg gets into the ground, which then blocks the energy that you had built towards the plate in the stride into pelvis rotation. So now your pelvis is rotating pretty dang fast. But what's the point of pelvis rotation? Now the whole point of rotating the pelvis is to load hip-shoulder separation rotationally. Now hip-shoulder separation, don't think about it as the hip and the shoulder. What it really means is pelvis and rib cage separation. So the whole point of rotating the pelvis is to load the tissue between the pelvis and the rib cage. Now, so if here's your rib cage and here's your pelvis, we'll keep the rib cage closed. Essentially, we'll keep those shoulders closed and we'll rotate the pelvis underneath it. Now, in doing that, you're going to load that tissue in between the two structures, and that loads the next stretch shortening cycle. So once that stretch shortening cycle is loaded, once you have the tissue between the pelvis and the torso loaded, the output of that is torso rotation. What's the point of rotating the torso? The point of rotating the torso is to load the arm into external rotation. So as that torso rotates, your arm ends up loading into external rotation, which then loads the structures that internally rotate the arm. And once that arm is fully laid back into external rotation and those internal rotators of the arm are fully loaded, it then contracts to rotate back to neutral to throw the ball. So let's put this all together. The first input is the downward move. The output of that is pelvis rotation and moving faster towards the plate. The next step is your front foot gets into the ground, which then transfers that energy that you generated during the stride into pelvis rotation. And the point of pelvis rotation is to combine with keeping the torso closed to load hip-shoulder separation rotationally. And once rotational hip-shoulder separation is loaded, when it unloads, it rotates the torso. The point of rotating the torso is to load the arm into external rotation, and once the arm is rotated into external rotation, it internally rotates back to neutral to throw the ball. Now, one very important caveat to understanding the throw as a series of stretch shortening cycles is really looking at what's happening at the elbow as the shoulder lays back into external rotation. Think of the forearm as a lever that allows you to apply force to the shoulder to load it rotationally. Now think of how difficult it would be to load your arm into external rotation if your elbow was straight. Now you can't load that into external rotation by rotating, you're just gonna load back this way. So the elbow being bent allows you, as you rotate, to load that arm into external rotation. Because the elbow is used in that way, there is a huge amount of stress on that elbow as the arm loads into external rotation, and the structures that stabilize that stress and handle it really fight to try and keep that stable and not allow this elbow to end up gapping as you rotate back into external rotation. So while the entire system is bouncing energy from piece to piece, gotta remember there are pieces like the elbow that their job is to keep everything stable and stabilize the position so energy can bounce more efficiently from piece to piece. Now there are definitely other things happening within the throw when we really isolate each piece and look at its specific job and what it's doing at each point in time. But what I really want to present here is the idea that every single time we do any sort of training, we will tie it back to the job that that piece is doing within the throw. So no matter what you're doing, if you ask why are we doing this, you will get an answer of exactly why we're doing this and exactly how it's going to transfer into making you a better pitcher on the mound. Now, like I said at the beginning of this video, there is a whole lot of information here. So any questions, anything you're not sure of, go back, go ahead and rewatch it, and then shoot me a text. Let's chat it through. I really want to make sure you understand everything that's in here.